The envelope was thicker than I expected. I remember thinking that, standing in the parking lot of Garrison and Webb, the law firm my father had used for 20 years, holding this manila envelope with my name written in my mother's handwriting. Not typed. Handwritten. Margaret, it said, in that careful script she used when something mattered. My father had been gone for 11 days. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours in a row since the funeral. My husband had been wonderful. Everyone said so. He'd handled the caterers, the flowers, the out-of-town relatives. He'd shaken hands and said, "We're so sorry for your loss," on my behalf when I couldn't make words come out of my mouth. He was good at that. My husband. Good at the surface of things. I sat in my car before going inside. I watched a woman walk her golden retriever across the crosswalk. A delivery truck idled at the corner. The ordinary world kept moving, the way it always does, indifferent to the fact that my father's reading chair was empty now, and the garage still smelled like his sawdust and his old coffee thermos, and I didn't know what to do with any of that yet. I went inside. Mr. Webb was my father's age. He had the kind of face that had probably looked 60 for the last 30 years. He shook my hand, offered water, gave me a moment, and then slid a folder across the desk. The estate was straightforward, he explained. The house in Delwood went to my mother, the savings account, the truck, the small woodworking tools my father had collected over 40 years in the garage. Those went to my brother, who lives in Portland now and never learned to use any of them but would have been destroyed if they'd gone anywhere else. And then there was the business. Hendricks Precision Parts. My father had started it in 1987 in a rented unit off Route 9. By the time I was in high school, it had 12 employees and a contract with 2 regional manufacturers. By the time I graduated college, it had 22 employees and a building he owned outright. It was never glamorous. He made metal components, brackets, housing parts, specialty fittings. He used to say, "Maggie, nobody ever gets excited about a bracket until they need one." I used to roll my eyes. I understood it now. Mr. Webb told me my father had left me 43% of Hendricks Precision Parts, not to my brother, not split between us. To me. There was a condition attached, a management clause, meaning I would need to take an active role or the shares would convert to a buyout arrangement at fair market value. My father had thought of everything. He always did. I asked what the company was worth. Mr. Webb told me. I sat very still. Then I asked him to repeat it. He did. I had grown up watching my father pack lunches in a brown paper bag and drive a truck with 200,000 miles on it. I had no idea. Before I left, Mr. Webb handed me a sealed envelope, smaller than the manila one, plain white, the kind you buy in bulk at a drugstore. My name again, in the same handwriting. "Your father asked me to give you this separately," he said. "He was specific about the timing, after the reading, before you left the building." I opened it in the elevator. There were 2 sentences. "Don't tell your husband what you inherited. Tell him the business has been losing money for years and the estate is mostly debt," and underneath, in smaller letters, "Trust me, sweetheart. I'll explain everything. Look in the blue accordion folder in my filing cabinet, bottom drawer, behind the hanging files." The elevator doors opened. I was in the lobby. A woman held the door for me, and I walked through it without remembering how my legs worked. The drive home took 25 minutes. I spent most of it trying to convince myself I had misread something. My father was the most straightforward man I had ever known. He paid his taxes early. He returned shopping carts. He had never in my memory said a dishonest word to another person. And he was asking me to lie to my husband. I kept turning it over. What did he know? What had he seen? My husband's name is Warren. We had been married for 4 years. He was in commercial real estate, acquisitions specifically. He was good at it the way some people are just wired for certain things. He could look at a property and tell you what it was worth, what it could be worth, and what you'd need to make that happen. He loved the puzzle of it. He talked about it the way my father used to talk about machined parts, with a particular precision, a satisfaction in the fit of things. I had always found it admirable. I pulled into our driveway. Warren's car was there. He'd worked from home that day, he'd said, to be around if I needed anything. I sat in my car for a long moment. Then I put on the face I needed and went inside. He was in the kitchen. He looked up from his laptop when I came in, and his expression shifted into something careful and attentive. How'd it go? Complicated, I said. The business has been hemorrhaging money for a while, apparently. Dad never told us. There's debt attached to the estate. Something crossed Warren's face. It wasn't what I expected. I had expected sympathy, or maybe that particular expression he made when someone presented him with a problem. Instead, it was, and I'm still not certain I'm describing this right, it was the look of a person recalibrating, something adjusting behind his eyes. How much debt? He asked. He asked that before he asked if I was okay. I told him I didn't have all the details yet. He nodded, said he was sorry, made me tea. The rest of the evening was ordinary. We ate dinner. He watched something on television and I pretended to read. He fell asleep easily, the way he always did, and I lay in the dark thinking about my father's handwriting. About 2 sentences in a plain white envelope. About the particular precision with which my husband had asked how much. I went to my parents' house the next morning while my mother was at her sister's. She'd been spending a lot of time there. She couldn't be in the house for long yet. It still felt too much like him. I understood that. The filing cabinet was in his office, a small room off the hallway that smelled like old paper and the cedar blocks he kept in the closet. Bottom drawer. Behind the hanging files. The blue accordion folder. It was thick, secured with an elastic band that had started to dry out the way rubber does when it's been sitting in a cool room for a long time. Inside, printed emails, bank statements, a handwritten timeline on yellow legal pad paper, and a post-it note on top of everything, stuck to the inside cover in my father's writing, "For you. Take your time." I sat on the floor and read. The emails were between my husband and a man named Douglas Fitch, whom I had never heard of. Douglas Fitch was a business broker. The emails dated back almost 3 years. They discussed, in the flat and practical language of acquisitions, the potential purchase of Hendrix Precision Parts. They discussed valuation. They discussed timing. One email mentioned in passing that the owner was aging and in declining health, and that patience would likely yield a favorable outcome. My father had been diagnosed with his heart condition 2.5 years ago. Warren knew. I had told him. I had cried in his arms in our bedroom, and he had held me and told me it would be okay. And at some point during those same months, he had been emailing a business broker about the favorable outcome of my father's declining health. The bank statements were my father's business account. He'd been quietly documenting something, payments, transfers, small things that alone looked like nothing but together built into a pattern. At the bottom of the stack was a note from my father's accountant, a woman named Patricia Holt, who had worked with him for 15 years. 3 sentences. She'd noticed irregularities. She brought them to my father's attention. She'd advised him to document everything and consult an attorney. He had consulted Mr. Webb. Mr. Webb had known all of this, and my father, methodical, patient, precise, the man who believed in machined brackets because they held things together quietly without anyone noticing, had spent the last 2 years building a case. I sat on the floor of his office for a long time. At some point, I heard his voice very clearly in my head, the way you do with people who have been part of your whole life, not a message from beyond, just memory. Just the particular cadence of a man who measured twice before he cut anything. Maggie, you don't make a move until you know exactly what you're working with. I took photos of everything with my phone. Then I put it all back, exactly as I'd found it, and drove home. The next 2 weeks were quiet. That was the hard part. How ordinary everything looked. Warren went to work. He brought home takeout on Thursdays. He asked about my mother. He suggested, gently, that maybe I should think about what I wanted to do with my involvement in the business, given the financial situation. He knew someone who specialized in distressed business sales, he said, just in case it got to that point. I said I'd keep it in mind. My mother-in-law called during that time. She was the kind of woman who asked questions the way some people do gardening, slow, patient, and always with a purpose underneath. She asked how my mother was holding up. She asked about the estate. She mentioned that handling a business during grief must be so difficult, especially a struggling one. I hadn't told her anything about the business. Warren had. That was the moment I understood that this had never been just my husband. This was a plan that had been running in the background of my marriage, like a program I didn't know was installed. His mother had known, had probably been involved in the original conversation 3 years ago, when my father's health news made someone in that family pull out a calendar and start thinking about timing. I called my best friend Cleo. We had been friends since the 7th grade. She listened to everything I told her, and then she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "What do you need?" Not "are you sure?" Not that seems like a lot to assume. Just, "What do you need?" I told her I needed a real estate attorney and a corporate attorney, and I needed both of them to understand the situation before I made any move. I also told her, and this felt important, that I did not want Warren to know I had the folder. Not yet. "He thinks he knows what you have," Cleo said. "Yes," I said. "And he doesn't. No." She was quiet again. "Then your dad was something else. He really was." The attorneys were efficient and direct in the way that good attorneys are when they can see the whole picture laid out in front of them. The emails were not nothing. The documented pattern in the business accounts was not nothing. The broker, Douglas Fitch, had, it turned out, a professional relationship with Warren that predated our marriage. That was something. I won't detail everything that happened in that period because some of it is still technically in process, and my attorney has advised me accordingly. What I will say is this: 43% of Hendrik's precision parts cannot be compelled into any transaction by a spouse. Inheritance is not a marital asset in this state. My father had known that. My father had also structured things with Mr. Webb's help so that even if I had somehow wanted to sell, there were clauses and conditions that would have slowed the process considerably, long enough, in any case, for everything to come out. He had built a holding structure the same way he built everything, carefully, in advance, with attention to the small parts that most people overlook. When I finally sat down with Warren and said what I knew, he didn't deny it the way I had expected. There was a kind of relief in his face, actually, the relief of a person who has been performing something and is exhausted from it. He said he'd made choices he wasn't proud of. He said his family had put pressure on him. He said he'd always cared about me, which I believe is probably true and also not the point. I asked him one question. Just one. When you held me the night I told you about my dad's diagnosis, were you already emailing Douglas Fitch? He looked at the wall. Not at me. At the wall. That was its own kind of answer. The divorce took 8 months. It was not clean or simple, but it also was not the war it might have been. Warren's attorney, to his credit, seemed to understand quickly that the situation was not going to unfold in Warren's favor. The business documentation alone was enough to make any proceeding uncomfortable. I moved into my parents' house for a while. My mother wanted the company, and I needed somewhere that felt like solid ground. I ate at my father's kitchen table. I walked his dogs. I sat in his reading chair and felt the specific shape of missing someone who had been quiet and certain, and always 3 steps ahead. Hendrik's Precision Parts has 27 employees now. I kept Patricia Holt as the accountant. I kept the building on Route 9, and I added a second unit next to it when the lease came up. The work is unglamorous in exactly the way my father described. Nobody gets excited about a bracket until they need one. I get it now. Some of my father's guys, the ones who've been there 15 or 20 years, they'll catch me doing something the way he did it, calculating out loud or double-checking a measurement that doesn't need checking, and they'll get this look. Not sad exactly. More like recognition, like they can see something of his in the way I'm standing there. I don't mind it. I like it, actually. The blue accordion folder is in my filing cabinet now, bottom drawer. I'll probably never need to look at it again, but I've never moved it. It feels important to have it where I can reach it, in a room that has his coffee thermos on the shelf and a framed photo of the Route 9 building from 1987, when it was just 1 unit and a hand-painted sign. My father used to say that the most important thing about a precision part is tolerances. How much variation you allow before something stops functioning. You have to decide in advance, he said. You have to know your tolerances before the pressure is on, because under pressure, you can't think clearly. I think about that a lot. He knew his tolerances. He set them years before I needed him to. He documented and waited and then, in the space of one elevator ride, handed me everything I needed to protect myself. I didn't know what he was doing while he was doing it. I didn't know he was worried. I wish he'd told me. I wish we'd had a different conversation, one where he could have said, "I see something wrong and I'm scared for you," instead of doing it all quietly, the way he did everything, alone and careful and without drama. But I understand why he did it that way. He wanted me to be safe. And he knew that knowing what was coming might have made me act too early, before the case was complete, before I had everything I needed. He built the whole thing to hold my weight. He just didn't tell me he was building it. That's the thing about precision work. You don't see it happening. You only find out it was done right when you finally put your weight on it and it holds. Mine held. I used to think that being smart meant reacting fast. That the people who won were the ones who moved first, talked loudest, pushed hardest. Warren was like that. He was quick. He could read a room in 30 seconds and know exactly what angle to take. I admired it for years. I mistook speed for intelligence and confidence for character. My father was the opposite. He was slow in the way that careful people are slow. He measured. He documented. He never made a move until he understood the full picture. People who didn't know him well sometimes read that as passivity. It wasn't. It was discipline. The kind that's hard to sustain because it requires you to sit with discomfort and not act on it yet. When I found that blue accordion folder, I wasn't just reading old emails. I was reading 3 years of my father choosing, every single day, not to panic, not to confront, not to tip his hand. He had watched someone he didn't trust move closer and closer to something he had built with his own hands over 40 years, and he had responded not with anger, but with documentation, with attorneys, with a structure so carefully designed that even after he was gone, it held. That is what integrity looks like when it's real and not performed. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It just keeps showing up, quietly doing the work, even when the person doing it knows they may not be around to see the outcome. I think about Warren sometimes. Not with bitterness, mostly with a kind of tired clarity. He made choices that compounded over time into something he couldn't undo. The emails he wrote to Douglas Fitch weren't a single bad decision. They were 100 small ones, each one a little further from the person he might have been. That's how it usually works. Nobody becomes someone who schemes against a dying man's family in one moment. They get there gradually, one rationalization at a time, each step making the next one easier. And the thing is, it didn't work. Not because the universe corrected it in some dramatic way. It didn't work because my father had already corrected it years before by being exactly who he was. His integrity was the mechanism. His patience was the protection. The cause came first, a long time ago, and I only saw the effect standing in his office on a Tuesday morning holding a folder full of evidence. What I carry from all of this, what I actually believe now, not just intellectually, but in my body, is that the way you do things matters more than almost anything else. Not just ethically, though it matters ethically too. It matters practically. The habits you build, the choices you make when no one is watching, the willingness to do the slow, hard, careful work instead of the fast, easy, careless version, those compound too, in your favor if you let them. My father built a company for 40 years by caring about tolerances, about the small margins of error that most people wave off. He applied that same standard to everything, to the way he kept records, to the way he treated Patricia Holt, to the way he handled the worst situation of the last years of his life. I try to run Hendrix the same way now. I don't always get it right, but I know what I'm aiming for. And on the days when I'm tempted to cut a corner, to wave off a small thing, to let something slide because it's easier, I think about a plain white envelope, 2 sentences, and the kind of love that plans 3 years ahead just to make sure you land safely. That's what I want to be capable of. That kind of love, that kind of patience, that kind of work.